Hey, somebody needs to update their passport. You have? Excellent. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. You are listening to The Professional Noticer. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Andrews. Hey, thank you for making me a part of your week. My purpose here today and with every show we do is to play the part of a best friend or coach. I want to help you live the life of your wildest dreams by giving you access to the greatest mentors the world has to offer today. This week, The Professional Noticer is sponsored by Books for Veterans. The Veterans Administration in Washington, D.C. has asked for 10,000 more Andy Andrews books. I'm personally donating as many as I can, but to reach that next 10,000, I need your help. What we're able to do to make that easier for you is for every $12 donation you make, a hardback book will be sent to the Veterans Administration for veterans, their families, and for the employees of the VA. That $12 will cover the cost of the book, the shipping, the handling, everything. So, or you can purchase one of these awesome Books for Veterans t-shirts, and your purchase will include a book sent in your name. So whether you can make this a personal gift or a corporate donation, just go to andyandrews.com/veterans. This can be added to a website purchase done as an individual entry or in conjunction with a Books for Veterans t-shirt. Thank you very much for your support. Observations and answers, that's what we do here on The Professional Noticer. And as you know, we love it when somebody comes to the table with both. And I got to tell you, we have one of these most interesting person in the world situations here today. You are going to love this guest. He spent years in the Army flying an Apache helicopter and was stationed in South Korea, in Germany, in Texas, those three countries. And then did a tour in Afghanistan where he won a Bronze Star and the Air Medal with a V for valor. And after his Army career, he moved right into being a special agent with the FBI and on the SWAT team in the Dallas office. And what else can I tell you about Don? He has an electrical and computer engineering degree from Ohio State University. We got to talk about you being a Buckeye, Don. That's you're in Roll Tide territory now. And then you know, then the guy writes best-selling books. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and you've read his books. You've seen his books. He's the author of the Matt Drake thriller series. He has written the Tom Clancy books, the Jack Ryan Jr. Tom Clancy books, and now he is on the spot. He is man of the hour. He is the guy that has been contracted to write, you know, as many of our thriller fans know, Vince Flynn died a few years ago. Kyle Mills took up that mantle for several episodes of the Mitch Rapp books, but now it's Don Bentley. Don Bentley is being Vince Flynn here for us. So please welcome Don Bentley. Don, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Andy. That was a heck of a welcome, but there's just one little thing you misspoke on. I actually graduated from the Ohio State University, so you forgot that little word there in the beginning.
Oh,
it's
my
a common
gosh.
mistake.
You guys are going the way of Miami, you know, the University of Miami, the Ohio State. You know, I would understand that, but you're in a state that don't have anything else, man. I mean, here we could say the University of Alabama because we have Auburn in our state, which is I shouldn't even cuss on the air by saying that word, but yeah, I'm a big fan of your football program, and Jim Tressel is a really close friend of mine, and.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. It was pretty amazing going to school there. I will say my house growing up was a house divided because my dad went to that school up north. And so when I was in college, the majority of the time after that game, there would be a voicemail waiting for me from my dad because we didn't fare so well in those years. But I've rallied a bit since. But now I've been in Texas almost 20 years and my son is an Aggie. And so he's in the depths of despair once again. So that's what I've got going on here.
Well, at least your son's a part of the SEC. So at least now the family can know what real football is like.
As opposed to the Big 10 or Big 20 or however many schools are in that division.
Golly,
now. We don't know.
I can't keep up anymore. I mean, just like the world has come to a weird place when Texas and Oklahoma are in the SEC. Just very weird. Oh man, you have an amazing background, and then to write at the level that you have achieved, I'm just amazed. This is one of those most interesting person in the world kind of situations. And is it too redundant or too much of a beginning thing for you to tell me how you started in writing? How did that get going?
Yeah, sure. So first off, I appreciate your characterization as the most interesting person in the world, because the way my wife terms it is the person who can't figure out what they want to be when they grow up. And that might be true too. And in fact, what I tell people when my first book came out, which was called Without Sanction in my series, I was on an interview with a radio host, and she said, "Are you Matt Drake? Was I my protagonist?" And I said, I am absolutely not him, but I've been lucky enough to stand in the same room with men who could be. And I think that's been something that has been very unique to me, is that I got to hold a number of jobs where I rubbed shoulders with the true heroes, and then I get to write about them. And so I started writing, I was a kid that grew up in the 80s, and there was some groundbreaking, phenomenal TV shows back then by the names of like the A-Team and Knight Rider and Airwolf and Magnum PI. And so even as a kid, I was a storyteller more than I was a writer. And so I remember watching some of those phenomenal cinematic events, and at the end thinking, man, wouldn't it have been interesting if they would have done this instead? And so that kind of led, even in junior high, no matter what the English assignment was, I'd write some variant of fan fiction of the A-Team or G.I. Joe, to the point where my 5th grade teacher once said, "You cannot write another book or another story about guys with guns doing whatever." And so I said, "I'll show her. I'll do it for a living." And so I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. I actually wrote 3 books over 17 years that nobody cared about and didn't sell. And so if you discount that, I'm pretty much an overnight success. But it took a long time for me to kind of develop the tools to be able to tell the stories that I wanted to tell.
Man, I I read your stuff, and I know that I understand why somebody would ask if you were Matt Drake, because being around that stuff has given some of you guys, I guess you, Jack Carr, has given some of you guys an insight that the library can't give or the internet can't give. There's just a feel to it.
It definitely is. And that's one of the things, like I said, Jack Carr, the distinction I'll make is that Jack Carr actually was a Navy SEAL and a sniper. Another great one is a friend of mine, Brad Taylor, who writes the Pike Logan New York Times bestselling series. Brad was a Special Forces officer and a Delta Force troop and squadron commander. And so I think, but if you go back and look at some of the giants of this genre, so Tom Clancy was an insurance salesman with a library card, and Vince Flynn was a bartender, and Brad Thor was a travel writer. And so you don't have to have that kind of background, but you have to be willing to do the work and the research to learn what you're missing. Mark Graney, another giant of the genre now that does the Gray Man series.
Gray Man, yeah.
No military experience whatsoever, but he has spent a significant amount of time, doing CQB, close quarter battle, shoot houses and training and just trying. And I think that's the difference. You either have that organically, like some of the folks you served with, or you have to love it enough to be willing to listen to stories and just sponge that up. I've been lucky enough that even once I got out of the FBI, I worked for small companies who made technology for folks in the special operations or intelligence communities. And so a lot of times we'd go on customer visits, and after it was over, I'd buy them a beer and I'd just sit there and listen to stories. And, and my coworkers were all folks who came from the Ranger Regiment or the Delta Force, or we didn't have any SEALs because we had higher standards, but we had all of the rest of them. And I joke about
sure
that
Jack
a lot.
Appreciates that.
Jack does. Jack knows. And in fact, because my friends were all from the Army Special Operations community, SEAL jokes are featured very prominently in my writing, to the fact that Brad Taylor was interviewing me for the third book in my series, Hostile Intent. And before it started, he's like, you might have gone too far this time. There might be too many SEAL jokes. And so the joke is on me because I've been lucky enough to now write for Vince Flynn, and Vince loved Navy SEALs. In fact, Scott Coleman, who's a prominent character in the series, is a former Navy SEAL from SEAL Team 6. So I've had to temper those impulses some with Capture or Kill, my first Vince Flynn book.
Yeah, this one is out today.
Today.
Capture or Kill, the new Mitch Rapp novel by Don Bentley. I mean, my oldest son loves Mitch Rapp, and so he's going to be excited that I got to talk to you, and I'm excited about this new one coming out. This is out today, and it's out in all formats, and so you can get the hardback for your library, get the Kindle for the airplane, get the audio for the car, and get going.
Yeah, we encourage you to buy all three of those because I have two kids that still need to go to college. So buy them all. All kidding aside, Vince Flynn, I never got to meet him. As you mentioned, he passed away about 9 or 10 years ago from prostate cancer, and he was really young. He was only 47 years old, but he was a giant to me, both as a fan and as a writer. I always associated kind of his books with Afghanistan. I was stationed in Afghanistan from 2005 to 2006. And everywhere you went, there were little pop-up libraries where people would just leave copies of paperbacks and you could steal one or leave one. And a lot of those were Vince Flynn books that I read in Afghanistan. And so then for me as a writer, when I think it was my second book didn't sell, I took my favorite Vince Flynn book, which is Protect and Defend, and I note carded it all out. I used a different color note card for every character. And then we lived in this little tiny house and I didn't have an office. And so I taped all of those note cards to my bedroom wall, which my wife was less than thrilled about, but it really gave me kind of insight into the master of the genre. How did he think? How did he move characters in and out? How often did Mitch Rapp come on the scene? And so it was kind of the difference between looking at a house and looking at the blueprints of the house. And so to be in the position where I get to continue his legacy all these years later is frankly overwhelming. And so there are a lot of times I've been fortunate enough to get to know his widow, Lisa, a little bit, and then certainly his longtime editor, Emily Bessler, and his literary agent, Sloan Harris. And so they've all kind of gotten used to it now, but usually at the end of the phone calls with each of them, or if I'm having dinner with Lisa and her new husband, I'll always say, can you tell me a Vince story? Can you tell me? Because I want to know both what he was like as a person and then what are some of I feel like the better I know him, the better maybe I can understand what he was trying to do with this series and how he thought of his characters. And that's part of the huge responsibility that you undertake when you get to write in a legacy series, is that you're standing on the shoulders of giants. And so you want to tell new and better stories that bring new readers in, but you're also every day very cognizant of the fact that you are playing in somebody else's sandbox, and Vince's sandbox is a pretty amazing place to tell stories.
This I don't remember growing up and seeing big authors have somebody else write their series. Tom Clancy seemed to me, it was the first time I was aware of it. Let's put it that way. And then that is expanded a great bit, and I have to say, I don't think all of them do a great job. And so, and there's obviously a little nepotism involved in some of those, that, maybe the son can't write as well as his dad did. But there's exceptions to that too. But I I have been very curious about. I met Vince one time at a book signing thing that he was in the booth next to me, or I was in the booth next to him, or
That's
something. We
awesome.
talked a little bit, but I haven't met his family or his team. But I'm very curious about that because they have produced A+
Yeah.
stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously the world misses Vince, but his series,
Yeah.
the quality has not diminished, and you can't say that about everybody who's doing this.
Well, I think Emily Bessler and Sloan Harris, his editor and agent, very much are the guardians of his legacy, and they don't take that responsibility lightly. And so, for instance, when I came over to write in the Clancy universe, there had already been a number of writers who had done that very well. So
Mark
Mark
Graney was one
Graney,
of them,
yeah,
wasn't he?
he wasn't the first writer, but he was the first writer to have written with Tom and then wrote in the series after Tom passed away. And so the editor for that is a guy named Tom Colgan, who was also the editor for my Matt Drake series. And then when I wrote for Clancy books, he was the editor for all of those. And so he was very specific as well about how to pick those authors out. But Clancy is also a very big enterprise where there are movies and video games and books by different publishers and stuff. Vince Flynn and so when I came into the Clancy one, I think number one, the fans had grown accustomed to writers rotating in and out, and it really wasn't a big deal from the standpoint of, nobody noticed when I came in. When I came into the Flynn one, Vince's publicist, who's now my publicist, a guy named David Brown, who's fantastic. Right. When they announced it, he texted me and he's like, "This is trending on Twitter right now." And the reason why it was trending wasn't because readers were overjoyed to see me necessarily. It was because that group of people had done such a great job of protecting Vince's legacy that readers were excited to see it continue, but also very nervous about who is this new guy that they're bringing in. Because to your point, Kyle Mills, when Vince passed away, nobody was sure whether there would even be more books. And so they brought Kyle Mills in, and he actually, I think, took a year off before he produced his first book because he wanted to reread every Vince book and make sure he was thoroughly enmeshed in the series. And Kyle didn't just tread water. He took the series in new and bigger directions.
Right.
And so there was a lot of trepidation when I came on of, who is this guy? Can he do it? And I will say that the vetting process, I think, reflects that because it felt much more the Clancy folks were fantastic, and Tom Colgan is an incredible editor. But the experience coming on to the Flynn team was a lot different in that it felt like rather than joining a corporation, I was being invited to come be a partner in somebody's home business that they had spent years building and were very, very particular about who they were going to let into this thing that they'd created. And so it was, when people talk about Vince that worked with him, they still get choked up about it. He was just that kind of guy. And when you get to last year, I got to go with Kyle on his book tour. They called it the torch passing tour, where I interviewed him each time. And one of our first stops was Vince's hometown of Minneapolis. And the people would come up, and you could tell all the people who actually knew him. He's a hometown hero. Minneapolis is a small town, and they would call him Vinny, and then be like, and he was one of, had 7 or 8 siblings or however many it was. And you'd have people come up, "I was Vinny's babysitter in the 3rd grade," or "Vinny's sister used my wife as her hairdresser," or something. Like everybody had a personal story, and you could tell everybody genuinely loved this guy, besides the fact that he was a writer and told incredible stories. And it was really humbling, right? Because it's not just this nameless guy or this titan of the industry, even though he was that. It was also this hometown hero called Vinny, and you're being invited to continue on his legacy. And I took that responsibility very seriously, and I still do.
Well, Capture or Kill is out today. What can you tell us about it? What do you feel comfortable revealing?
So Capture or Kill is very unique in that it answers the question that Vince Flynn, Mitch Rapp fans have been asking for about the last 13 years. And that question is, what role did Mitch Rapp play in the mission to capture or kill Osama bin Laden? And so it was when I sat down to think about what I wanted to do for my first book, like Kyle, I spent a lot of time reading the books that Vince had written, because I wanted to make sure, I knew I couldn't write like Vince, but I wanted to make sure I understood his view on the characters, and especially on Mitch Rapp. And what Vince did that was very unique is that he aged Mitch in real time. And so every time a new book came out, whatever year that book came out, it was that year in the Mitch Rapp series. And so he stopped that after a book called Pursuit of Honor. He went back in time and wrote 2 prequels, and those were American Assassin and Kill Shot. And then he went forward in time and wrote his final book before he passed away that was called The Last Man. Well, when he did that, he left a couple of years that were black holes in the Mitch Rapp universe. And so I started looking at that, and I thought, I wonder what happened there. And so I did some Google searches, and one of those years was 2011, which was the bin Laden raid. And so I remember I was an FBI agent in Dallas at the time, and I remember standing in my living room and watching as President Obama walked up and stood behind that podium and said, "We just killed Osama bin Laden." And my first thought was something along the lines of, it's about time we got that guy. And my second thought was, wonder what Mitch Rapp had to do with that. Because again, as a huge fan, in Afghanistan and Vince Flynn were always linked together in my mind. And so I went back when it was my turn to write there and said, I wonder if Vince ever talked about that. And so if you go to Vince Flynn's website, there's a section still that lists questions that fans would write in and ask him, and sometimes he would answer. And so somebody asked him that. Somebody said, hey, what did Mitch Rapp do during this raid? And Vince kind of answered in a generic way, hey, if you look at this, there were certainly a lot of CIA officers who were involved in setting the conditions for that raid, and I imagine that's probably what Mitch was doing. And so that kind of sent me off to the races, and thought I could go back in time, tell a story that everybody's been wondering, what the answer to that question is, and I can bring back to life some characters that have since passed on since Kyle started writing. And it's kind of, the way I liken it is, again, being a kid of the 80s, I loved the movie Top Gun, loved it. In fact, my kids still know, when they ask a question, the answer is negative Ghost Rider. It's not no, it's negative Ghost Rider. And sometimes it's negative Ghost Rider, the pattern is full. And so when they came out with Top Gun Maverick, I was very, very anxious as a fan and thought, are they going to ruin the original? And I really feel like the writers of that movie wrote kind of a love letter to the fan, and they did acknowledgments for everything the fans loved about the original movie, while still furthering the story in new directions and introducing new characters. And that's what Capture or Kill is. It really is my love letter to the fans, to those OG Vince Flynn novels. And so you could get to go back in time and see that, and see an answer to a really interesting question at the same time.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to get my 3 copies of it today. My hardback, my Kindle copy, and my Audible copy. So who's doing the Audible on that?
So it's the actor that did it last time as well, Code Red. His name's Steven Weber. And so he's fantastic. If you're old like me, you might remember him as one of the actors for Wings. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We were just talking about that show in my house the other day. I have 2 boys, a
24 and 22, and they're both old souls.
Mm.
They talk about wings, and they grew up with. I guess I'm kind of an old dad, and so we can ask them questions about music, and they know the Eagles and all that 70s rock, and so
You've
it's
done
very
well
funny.
as a father. Then, if they can rattle off the Eagles, you've done well as a father.
That's what we figure. And we have this story in our house about we've raised them to be colorblind. We have this story in our house of Adam coming in the first grade and saying, "Okay, so BB King is black." Yes, he is. Yes, he is. How you raise your kids and they don't even know. But
Yeah.
so when you write, what is your process? I mean, I think people who are going to be getting Matt Drake books today, going to be getting Capture or Kill today, are going to be interested in that. What is your process?
Yeah, so writers tend to fall in two different camps. And so you can be what they call a plotter, somebody that outlines before, or you can be a pantser, somebody that writes organically.
Pants,
And yeah, exactly. And so Kyle Mills was famous for writing outlines that might be 40 or 50,000 words before he would put his pen down to write the first chapter of the novel. So he definitely fell into the plotter camp. I'm on the other side of the equation where when I start writing, I generally have an idea, kind of an overarching idea, and then I see kind of scenes that would be very climactic, that would escalate the stakes as I write. And so I usually write, and then I get stuck about every 20 or 30,000 words and despair that I am going to be the one who single-handedly brings down the Vince Flynn franchise or the Tom Clancy franchise or anything like that. And so what that means is that the first draft is a much more free-flowing and can be painful process where you constantly go back and say, what have I done so far? What are the clues that I've left in here that I haven't answered? How can I raise the stakes? There's a great book by Stephen James that's called Story Trumps Structure that kind of walks through how to write in that manner. And so when I have a first draft done, and I have a word count that I try and hit every day, I'm an engineer. Like I said, I'm one of the probably few people who have an undergrad in electrical engineering that write thrillers. And so I'm probably also one of the few people who use an Excel spreadsheet to write with, but I have kind of my word count that I'm trying to hit that day and that week and overall in order to stay on schedule. And so I genuinely start pretty early. I think Stephen King in his book on writing is famous for saying that writing is a more blue collar job than most people want to admit, that it consists of you sitting there and writing. But I think some of the magic part is there are times of the day that you're more productive than others. And unfortunately for me, that's pretty early in the morning. So I normally get up about 5 o'clock in the morning or something and start writing early. And if I do that, and I try and protect my mornings from interviews or phone calls and stuff, because that's when I'm most productive and I can get my words in that day. And so, and then when there's a saying in the special operations community or the infantry community, people that carry their life around in their rucksack, that ounces equal pounds, right? That the more small things you put in that rucksack, the heavier it gets. And it's the same thing with writing, in that, words equal sentences and sentences equal paragraphs and paragraphs eventually equal pages and then finally a published book. And so if you're dedicated to that, to writing every day and writing that word count, you can get the rough draft done. And then it takes me a while to revise that, because like I said, and rather than trying to go back and make changes as I realize things, I use the notes section quite a bit to just put in comments. Like, it's not unusual for me, and I take great joy in writing snarky notes to my future self. And so when I go back and do a rewrite, I might see a chapter that begins with a little comment that this sucks, do better, in the or there's no description here, or why did you ever give up your day job? Just encouraging notes like that. And so it takes me a while to wrestle that rough draft into final drafts and such, but that's kind of where the magic happens, I think, is in rewriting.
I am a pantser too. And I guess I always figured I was too lazy to write 50,000 words as notes before I got going, so.
Yeah, I wish I could. I've tried many, many times to do outlines and stuff before. And in fact, when I was working on my first Clancy book, my editor, Tom Colgan, said, "Hey, you got to write a synopsis for this book before you start because the Clancy estate has to okay it." I'm like, "Tom, you know how I work." And he's like, It's okay. Just write it. They'll understand that it's going to change." And so I wrote this 4-page synopsis and gave it to him. And so a year later, after the book was out and everything, or was about to come out, he said, "Hey, the UK is doing their own version of the book cover, and they want something that gives them a summary of the book. I've got this synopsis, this 4-page synopsis you looked at. I know things have probably changed. Can you just give it a read and tell me, where do I stop? Where does what you wrote differ from the book?" And so I looked at it and I said, about the first 3 sentences are good. The rest of it has nothing to do with the book. And so he and I together, he's an amazing editor and is really, really good at understanding writers at a visceral level, understanding what keeps them up at night, and being that guy that can both pat you on the back and kick you in the butt if you need it. And so for a while, when I was writing my Matt Drake series and the Clancy ones, I was writing a book every 5 months because they were coming out so close together. And so there were times where he needed marketing copy before I had gotten far enough in the book to even know. And so he would he wouldn't make it up, but he would take his best guess and throw it up. And so there'd been times where we've had to pull things off Amazon. And I'm like, that is not at all what the book is about. We probably need to fix that before people get copies of the book. But like I said, he was a fantastic guy to work with, a great editor. I've been blessed to work with, I think, 2 of the best editors out there, in Tom Colgan and Emily Bessler.
Wow. I think people who write seat of their pants have a hard time understanding people who plot things out, and people who plot things out look at somebody like you and go, how do you ever get this done? And I don't know if you know Dave Barry or Ridley Pearson. Both of them are acquaintances of mine. And I heard the story. We were in Ireland together, and I heard the story. They had just collaborated on a prequel to Peter Pan. And I can't remember if the book's called Peter or Pan or Neverland or what, but it was a very successful book. But hearing Dave, who's very funny,
I used to read his columns a lot. He's hilarious.
Yeah, hearing him talk about walking into Ridley's house in St. Louis and seeing all these note cards all over the wall, and knowing they were going to pass these chapters back and forth, Dave was like terrified. And hearing him tell the story of like, how are we going to do this together? Because he's a seat of the pants person, and Ridley Pearson's a plotter to the nth degree. But they did it. They did it. So
yeah, I know. There's this conference I go to quite a bit that was founded by like Lee Child and Steve Barry and a bunch of the very, very prestigious writers. And so every so often that conference would do an anthology where they'd get really popular writers to contribute short stories. And so they had one year, I think it was called Face Off, where they had this idea of bringing 2 writers together and their protagonists in a short story. And so Lee Child and I think it was Joe Finder did one together. And so Joe is a plotter and Lee is not. And I remember Joe telling the story of, he said, "Lee, are we going to do this?" And Lee's like, "Yeah." And Lee sends him the first paragraph, and Joe's like, "This is really good. What happens next?" And Lee's like, "I have no flipping idea." And so I think when you bring those 2 together, chaos may ensue.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and we will have links to the book, to you, everything on this episode, and I'm excited about this book. I'm excited about having talked to you. How can I help you, Don? What can we do to help you?
Well, I appreciate that. Like I said, if you wouldn't mind telling folks to just go to my website, it's donbentleybooks.com, Bentley. You can find everything I work on there and links to all my books that I get to write. And then if you're a social media person, I'm on X, Facebook, and Instagram, and my handle is the same for all three of those. It's just at Bentley Don B. So Bentley Don B. So I love connecting with readers. I love to hear what folks think about the books, even the bad stuff. So connect with me and buy the book, for crying out loud. I've got kids to feed. That's my closing argument. Capture or Kill comes out today.
We will do it. We'll get them. My three are going in as soon as we get off the air. So thank you, buddy, for being here. I appreciate your time, and don't hesitate to call on us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sandy.
All right. Bye-bye. I'm Andy Andrews, the professional noticer, harnessing common sense and wisdom to plow through challenges all the way to an answer for you. And I think that'll do it for this week. Get us out of here, Matthew. So, ladies and gentlemen, and to the boys and girls who aspire to become ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of another episode of The Professional Noticer. In a world where common sense has become a superpower, I'm harnessing that tiny bit of mental energy for you. Seeking wisdom, making observations, and endeavoring to answer tough questions in a way that will empower your family and your business. I'm Andy Andrews. Until next week, goodbye. This episode of The Professional Noticer was produced by Matt Limpert. The Noticer theme written and performed by Sugarcane Jane. Action heroes for the cast and crew provided by Twinkle and Smoke of Beverly Hills. Additional financial consideration provided by the new online game that's sweeping the nation, WhichTestamentIsThat.com. Do you think you're a Bible scholar? Do you know Scripture better than your family or friends? An evening of wholesome fun awaits when you download this year's Pentecostal Board Game of the Year, WhichTestamentIsThat.com. The board you play on can be your kitchen table set with 13 plates, and up to 10 players can participate. Each player should select their game piece from any religious item in the house. One might use a small wooden cross, while another represents with the St. Christopher medal. Start at the far left of the table, game pieces in the first plate, and for each correct answer, a player's game piece should be moved one plate to the right. There is a winner when the player has advanced his game piece into the 13th plate. Of course, the 13 plates represent the 13 people who attended the Last Supper. After downloading the game, click on the questions portion of the site and have fun. Questions refer to a scene or prevailing theme from the Bible. Upon hearing the question, the player must declare its origin, Old Testament or New Testament. Here are some examples. Spontaneously combusting bush, Old Testament. Fast food for 5,000, New Testament. Happy God, New Testament. Mad God, Old Testament. Fiery furnace, Old Testament. Walking on water, New Testament. It's easy and so fun for all ages. It's the Pentecostal Board Game of the Year, endorsed by the Southern Baptist Convention and Pope Francis himself. WhichTestamentIsThat.com.